everyone. Please rise for the pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
President Hammond?
Here.
Vice President Daley?
Here.
Trustee Clements?
Here.
Trustee Headland?
Here.
Thank you.
Okay. Welcome. Well, Ms. Parr is unable to attend this evening, so there was a little bit of hesitation there. Just a reminder that the next Board of Education meeting will be held on January 8th, 7 p.m. here in the band room, and that seems like it's a long time away. Everybody enjoy their break. We'll be ready to come back and work hard at that budget. Okay, Dr. Bernante.
Sure. Just a few brief comments before I shift to a presentation and introduce a guest who's with us here this evening. First, I just had the opportunity to attend our elementary and middle school winter concert performances, and I wanted to send an appreciation out to Ms. Stein and Ms. Verboda, who've done a great job preparing our students for those presentations to our community. I know our parents really enjoyed it. Had the opportunity to speak to a few parents while I was there, and I'm looking forward to the high school concert, which is tomorrow night. And Ms. Sniffen, not to put you on the spot, but I think the set list at last discussion was somewhere around 19 or 20 songs. Yeah, so a little bit lengthier than the elementary performance. So get ready. We're looking forward to that. And then just wanted to congratulate the students and the staff who were involved in the production of Romeo and Juliet. I know many of us had the opportunity to attend the play. It was fantastic. I had the opportunity to attend with my wife on Saturday night's performance, and we had a great time. And we were up in the balcony of the auditorium, and you forget that you're in the balcony of the auditorium. You feel like you're like you could have been in the middle of a theater down on Broadway. It was a fantastic show. We really enjoyed it. Andrew, congratulations. I know you were involved in that as well.
Thank you.
And hopefully it was a positive experience for you as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And
Really
often leaving here, you get a chance I go back up to the district office, so I had the chance to scoot into the auditorium periodically and see our students rehearsing for the play. There was a video going around yesterday I saw about the behind-the-scenes work that our students were doing, learning the sword fighting component and working with the specialist in that area. So not only did our kids have a great opportunity just to come together and learn more about Shakespeare, there's many elements of that work that they got to examine, particular areas of the production that I would say most students don't have the opportunity to do. So
And
it was
thanks
really
to the
fantastic.
Haldane School Foundation
Yeah.
for providing that opportunity.
That's right. And just to close before I transition, I want to wish everyone a happy holiday and New Year, both here and in the community who may be watching. Looking forward to a little break, and then we'll come back, as you said, Ms. Hammond, and get ready to get into full swing budget mode. So we're ready.
Absolutely.
With that, I'm going to just share a few slides as a segue to introducing Mr. LaPlaca. So if you don't mind. Yeah, thank you. I'm going to take... Thank you, Ms. Didio. I'm going to kick you out. So as a reminder, one of our goals this year was specific to facilities and safety, and I've spoken a little bit with the board about the anticipated work under the umbrella of facilities, and Ann and I will have more information on the facilities element of this goal next month for you. But I did want to spend some time sharing where I felt we were at with respect to the safety-related practices on campus. So the second part of this goal, an evaluation of the safety and security protocols currently in place in the school system, will be included as part of our process of examining the work related to facilities that may need to be done, and as necessary and or appropriate, a plan for improving the safety and security of the school district will be implemented. So I've been sitting with that along with members of our Health and Safety Committee, and I have some thoughts to share with you related to that this evening. First, I want to take us back to last school year as a reminder to the board and to our community that we did enlist the support of Putnam Northern Westchester BOCES to conduct a safety and security audit of our school system. That was done again last school year. The report and its recommendations were reviewed with the Board of Education in September, and that report is confidential because it contains sensitive information related to matters of safety on our campus, but it's important for our community to know that we do look at that report in detail with the individuals who facilitated the audit. The audit really covered several areas, most of which fell under the umbrella of school emergency planning and procedures, as well as general safety measures that were taken on campus. Now, I've sat with that report, and in addition to that, I've made some general observations and felt that I'm in a relatively good position to do so as a fairly new member to the school community. So things stand out to me, and I want to just summarize some of those. So. In addition to my general observations, I've also examined the district emergency response plan, including our building emergency response plans, our code of conduct, the activity levels of our building level emergency response teams, as well as our district level threat assessment team, and then observed the general readiness of staff to deal with a critical incident on campus if one were to occur. I've also heard, as I've met with community members, the desire to maintain our identity as a welcoming, family-friendly campus while ensuring that adequate precautions are taken to ensure the safety of our students and our staff and any visitors that we may have on our campus to the school community. And that can be a difficult balance to strike. And I think you've heard plenty of feedback. I was also watching old board meetings and listening to folks who've come out and shared their perspectives related to safety. And then including all of this, I've been meeting with our district health and safety committee. And as part of those meetings, listening to where they feel we've been as a school community and what they feel we may need or where we need to go as a school community, again, to try to strike this balance of maintaining our identity while ensuring that our schools are as safe and secure as they need to be for our kids and our staff and our visitors. So that's a difficult balance to strike, and I think that as school leaders, between myself and the other district administrators here, we're not necessarily experts in safety. We have certain background experiences and trainings that we go through to have a general level of preparedness, but there are individuals with whom we could work who bring a depth of expertise to us to really help us facilitate or effectuate this piece on the bottom here. So I really feel our best next steps are to work with individuals who have that background experience of working in schools and trying to, again, maintain and honor the identity of a school community while identifying areas where our schools could be safer and raising the general level of preparedness that our staff may have. And the Altaris group is one of those entities that I think has an outstanding reputation in the field, works with other school districts in our region, and has, again, a lot to offer us in this way. So I had an opportunity, Mr. LaPlaca is going to come up in a minute, but Mr. LaPlaca had the opportunity to meet with a subgroup of our Health and Safety Committee to talk a little bit about the service that they offer to school districts. I also then took that information and shared it with the Health and Safety Committee at large. And the general consensus from that committee was that they endorsed the potential for us to work with an entity like Altaris. Committee members shared a range of perspectives, something as simple as, this is great, this is exactly what we need, to more of a depth and reflection upon where we've been and feeling that an organization like Altaris and really strikes the right balance, not only in dealing with major critical incidents that can occur, occur, and there's a certain level of preparedness we want for major incidents, but also the incidents that are more likely to occur. If you were to talk to law enforcement entities or agencies, certainly we hear the worst case scenarios in the news and in the media, but there are a variety of things that can come up that a school has to deal with to maintain a safe learning environment for students. A few that come to mind: it could be someone who, it could be a weather-related event on campus. My wife's school just dealt with what was thought to be a gas leak in the area. And the school had to respond to that just as the kids were arriving towards school. Weather-related events we've experienced a lot of in this community. Maybe there's a loss of power to a particular building. How do we handle that? So in addition to what we may read about in the newspaper, there's many other and more, I would say, more likely scenarios we could encounter that an organization like Altaris can help us prepare for, so we can maintain instructional continuity as best possible, and again, be prepared to respond if needed. So with that, I'll ask John to come up, share a little bit more about the services his organization offers, and this is really an opportunity for the board to ask questions of him directly, and the work that Altaris has done in our region. So John, yeah, if you wouldn't mind, excuse our backs.
I don't think I've ever had the privilege of being introduced by a PowerPoint, but I'm flattered, so that's great.
Welcome to Haldane.
Thank you, thank you. Dr. Benante stole a lot of my thunder, but I would like to give you a brief overview of how we work with schools, and then, of course, answer any questions you might have. Altaris works currently right now with a little over 200 schools across the region. We're based down in Westchester County, so the body of our work, or the bulk of our work, is in the Hudson Valley region. We do have schools as far out as down on Long Island. We have schools down in New Orleans, New Jersey, so we're pretty widespread, but our main core service is in the New York area. One of the things that we like to talk about is during our assessment process, and I know you had an assessment done by BOCES, is that we come into schools initially to do an assessment of the schools to determine those things the schools are doing correctly and identify those improvement opportunities. This is not designed to be a white glove approach, because when you have to take a critical look in the mirror, the objective behind the process is to, are we doing the right things? And I'm sure you're doing plenty of things correctly, but you need to be reinforced with that. We bring not only the collective knowledge of content experts in the area of emergency management, safety, and security, but the collective knowledge of our work with other schools across the region and across the country. And that's critically important, because often when we go into a school district, they're just simply not sure if they're hitting the mark on specific things. Certainly there are always improvement opportunities that we identify as part of the process. And they can range from things from very low-hanging fruit that cost nothing at all. And I should mention that those improvement opportunities, typically you get the best return on investment for. Technology also comes into play, but you can spend an awful lot of money on technology with very little return on investment. And that's important. Technology does not respond to emergencies, the people do. So the issues of emergency planning, training, those are key components. Even procedural changes as far as your policy goes as well are critical components. So we look at everything from top to bottom in the district. We identify those things. We share those confidentially with the group that the district sets up. And what we'll typically do is to prioritize those issues so that we have a framework or a blueprint going forward for those things that we want to do going forward. There are typically about 125 planning steps that each building goes through in the district, and then countless number of other district-wide initiatives as well. So when you start doing the math on that, there are a number of moving parts when you're dealing even with a small district such as yours. So it's very, very critically important that there's a degree of project management that goes into the process. What we do not do, and many consultants do, is they come into a school district, do an assessment, give you that report, drop it on the desk, and then walk away. And it's on you as a district to implement. That's not going to move the ball down the court, because one of the things, and I think you pointed it out earlier, is that most school districts simply don't have the time and expertise to manage this critical function. You make it a top priority. It's obvious that you're making it a top priority, and we have the privilege of and the fortunate situation that we don't work with every single school district or school entity that approaches us. There has to be a degree of buy-in by the district at the outset, because it'll just be an uphill battle that just simply won't work. And when I see, some of the things that your superintendent just presented, it's music to my ears because, again, that's a district that gets it, that wants to take that next step forward, that is interested in this process and is not just checking a box. So that's very obvious. And unfortunately, there are school districts and private and public schools out there that are looking to just check boxes. So it's great to see that that's not the case here. So subsequent to that process, we now have our framework going forward on what we need to do. So we project manage that. We have software that does that. It assigns accountabilities. There's communications that we set deadlines on certain things to say, what are we doing? When are we doing it? Who's doing it? How do we get there? The objective at the end of the initial process is to improve your condition. Punch lists do not improve your condition. Action improves your condition, and that's critically important. 95% of the things that we talk about and that we'll discuss with you make perfect sense, and they'll be easily accepted. The other 5% are specific to your community that may or may not be right for Haldane. And there are a number of different things that fall into those categories. So it really depends on the culture and climate of each school district. What might be right in Haldane may not be right in a city school district down in Westchester County, and vice versa. So those are the things that you look at, and in some cases, you're going to want to get the input of the community in a forum such as this. Want to get the input of your school community internally as well. So there's different reviews that we go through in those processes. Some things are fast-tracked, some things have a partial review, and some things have a full review, which is by everyone that's involved in the school community. Typically things that touch people in the work environment or that change the feel of what a school looks like, those are the things that we really want to get a full review on. One of the big components that we deal with is training. Again, the people are critical to the success of a safety and security program, both the empowerment piece, just as far as see something, say something, as far as being empowered to implement protocols, critical components of a safe environment in your schools. So we spend a lot of time with the school emergency response teams, but all staff in all roles have to get role-specific training for their particular job functions in safety and security, because any one of us in the school community could be charged with identifying a threat and having to implement something in order to be, to be safe. There's the days of asking for permission from the principal are gone. They just simply are gone. So that training piece is critically important. Revision of all your emergency plans, both your district plan, which is the public document, as well as your building level plans. The state requires that you follow a certain template, which is a good start. We particularly see in upstate New York where some districts take that template, slap their name on it, and don't even modify the insert your name here portions of it, which is not good. Really, the process of going through planning is where you get the best benefit from. You're really not going to take that off the shelf in an emergency, but going through the process to identify where the gaps and loopholes are, what are the things that we need to plan for, what can we do, and can we actually do what we say we're going to do in the plans. So you have to go through that particular process. So that's something we go through. The state template in and of itself is totally not sufficient in order to work through a real emergency. So we identify those things. That's done in collaboration with your school community, as well as your outside stakeholders, law enforcement, fire, EMS, because I'm not responding to your schools. Actually, I probably would respond to your schools if it was a real emergency, but I'm not the one, the first responder to your building. It's going to be them. So they need to buy into what you're saying as well and identify something as simple as, hey, we evacuate to this parking lot, okay? And then the fire department gets there and goes, no, you got to move them. We're going to put our apparatus here to fight the fire. So those are the types of things you don't want to identify in the middle of an emergency. It's great that the school actually has a relationship with local police right now, and that's something we build upon, and we make sure that that's a strong relationship going forward, because that's going to be critical as far as the success of the program as well. So that's kind of an overview of what we do. One of the other intangibles is that we are partners to the district. So when at the outset, the district understands what the investment to work with our firm is throughout the course of the year. There is never a meter running. If Dr. Benante calls me at Sunday night at 11 o'clock at night and we have a 3-hour conversation, that's part of what we do. And that happens all the time. There's not a week that goes by that I'm not talking to a representative of a school district that we work with, because again, it could be as simple as, quick question, we had this happen today, what do you think about that? And the simple knowledge of saying, I've dealt with this 3 or 4 times or 50 times, this is the route you should go, and actually here's the resource to help you to get through that, can change the outcome of the event completely. It could be public information, getting equipment out, getting, how do we manage it, evacuating buildings, all those things are included. So there's never a meter running. One of the things we realized right off the bat is we never want a school district or any entity to think about the fact of, well, if we call up Altaris, we're going to get a bill, like a lawyer would typically do. We don't want there to ever be a barrier for you to involve us in that. That may mean that we spend a lot of time here, a lot of time on the phone, and that's fine. The part of the process that we want to make sure that we get right is that if there's a critical incident, we're here shoulder to shoulder with you. Certainly, if anything major happens in the district, we're coming out there and we're going to help you manage through that incident shoulder to shoulder, and that's critically important. So that's kind of a brief overview of the service. I could talk all night long, which I'm sure you don't want to hear. If you have any specific questions, one of the other pieces I did not mention before is that we work through several BOCES, Dutchess and Southern Westchester BOCES. So many districts across the state cross-contract through the BOCES for our services. Essentially, that allows districts to receive aid for the work that we do for them. And BOCES are a conduit to many districts that are looking for help because they simply can't provide those services internally, nor do they want to provide those services internally. So that's just something to mention as well. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
John, I had the opportunity to be part of that subcommittee, and I think something that's really important to understand is that Altaris does not sell any products. Did you want to speak to that?
Absolutely.
If I could just, so an
Sure.
example of what's come up at the safety committee that I've heard early on was, well, we need to evaluate our camera system on campus, which is not unusual. So with something like that, John, if we were to call Altaris and say, we know we have to upgrade our safety cameras, how would you help us with that?
Right. Well, from the business perspective, districts are pitched all the time from vendors that will say, we'll come into your district, we'll do an assessment of your school, and they'll come in and they'll do that. And they'll do the assessment, and lo and behold, you need cameras, you need access control, you need panic systems and all those things. And open comes the jacket, and there's our line of cameras and access control and panic systems. And unfortunately, that's not an unbiased approach. We are the, like I say when we have our discussion, the no-loaded mutual funds of safety and security consulting. You pay us a flat fee for our advice and expertise. We're your advocate. So we want to protect you from potentially vendors that might be coming in here to say, you need this, this, and this. You may very well need it. But we're going to look at those things and decide how do we prioritize where that is in the totem pole as far as interventions go, making sure that you don't overspend on those particular items, and give you impartial advice. So again, we don't want to ever come into a district to say, well, you need all these things, and here they are. The only time we ever get involved with selling anything other than our services is when multiple districts identify, boy, we need an item. And one of the things that comes to mind is emergency protocol flip charts, which you had up in Arlington. Sure. And these were just protocols that were quick reference guides for classrooms that at least a dozen superintendents said, hey, do you sell that? I said, no, we don't. I said, but I'll tell you what we'll do. Let's collaboratively make this together. I said, and then we'll print it in bulk, and then you can split the costs, and there you go. So sometimes we'll serve as a clearinghouse for that. But as far as going onto our website and going into our store, it doesn't exist. That's just not what we do. We're asked often about staffing. We don't provide staffing. Many people have said, well, can you open up a security guard service? Not only do I not want to get involved with that, but again, it's just not something we do. We have a very specific niche that we're very, very good at, and that's where we focus our time and attention on.
A little bit to the fee structure. So you said that there's a set fee. Correct. And is that like a year-long contract?
Correct. So typically we have 3 levels of service that we typically provide. One is an assessment-only service, which most districts do not do, and just about every district that starts with that ends up going on with us to our larger service levels because they really identify after the assessment process that this is more than we really can handle and have the time and expertise to do. The level 2 service adds a training component to it. The level 3 service, which probably 95% of our clients utilize, is our emergency management program, which is all the things I mentioned. There's a lot more work in the first year, which is reflective of a first-year client fee. So we have structured fees through the BOCES that you can go through there. And when you get that level 3 service, as we call it, the first year, the fee is set based on the number of schools that you have. The second year, that fee goes down almost 40% because we're not doing as much work the following years. We've built you up to where you need to be, and now it's basically maintaining that level of proficiency, safety, and security if you choose to continue with us. Just about every district does. Once we started with them, we have districts that have been with us for 10 years. Because again, we serve as their part-time emergency managers. And this is an ongoing thing. There are certain things that are one-off interventions there are many things that are cyclical that just have to continue to happen. You have to keep safety and security top of mind. It's critically important.
So I think for our school district, the first year fee would be somewhere around $22,000 to $24,000. I just lost sight of the exact number. And then as John mentioned, that second year, I think it falls somewhere around $14,000. As John mentioned earlier, that is, we do receive aid back on those costs of approximately 40%, or a rate of approximately 40%. Aid reimbursement. Part of the mechanism of bringing this up now, not only is it part of a goal area, but as Ann and I were working on budget, we were realizing we were coming in under budget in certain areas of our BOCES service requests, that perhaps there's an opportunity since we had already planned a certain level of BOCES service funding, that it falls right around to be this amount currently. So I thought it may be an opportunity to engage Altaris sooner rather than later, and start to address some of the matters that that we see. Of course, we would wait for an assessment to be fully complete at that point.
Just one other thing that I know we discussed in the subcommittee meeting was that basically this service is really hands-on, a lot of training,
Right.
more so than you can have all the cameras in the world and your staff not knowing how to react to certain situations. This is where you come in and
It's much more proactive than it is
Proactive.
reactive. Cameras are a big piece. So what happens is cameras tend to be a knee-jerk reaction in the wake of a critical incident that happens someplace in the country. So when you see a post-Parkland or post-Sandy Hook, the big reaction is we need to get lots of cameras in the building. We have school districts that have hundreds of cameras in the buildings. I can tell you that no one is watching hundreds of cameras during the course of the day. They may periodically look at them and identify them, but the attention span on a camera monitor is about 20 minutes before you should rotate someone out. You simply don't have that. It's not a casino where they're literally looking to identify people that may be cheating. Where cameras come into play is post-incident and even during an incident. So if you have some type of incident, you're probably going to use them 99% of the time for who started the fight, who stole property, who did criminal mischief to the building, those type of trespassing, those types of things. And occasionally what you'll utilize them for is if you had, God forbid, a critical incident in the building, it gives you a bird's eye view of what is going on in that building right now, and can we identify what the threat is, where the threat is, and that can be utilized with your law enforcement partners as well. So again, it's a great tool to be utilized by administrators. Proactively, it just serves as a deterrent because people understand that if I do something, the camera's watching me. So it does serve as a deterrent, but again, it is more of a reactive than a proactive piece.
Go ahead.
So you mentioned. Oh, sorry.
Good luck.
No, that's okay.
I'm speaking to the microphone.
Just
I'm
talk
always
loudly.
getting in trouble for not doing it. So you spoke to the fact that you serve 200 school districts, and that I might be getting some of the details wrong, but that everybody, there's 125 step process that people go through. So it sounds like you serve a lot of schools. It is a pretty hands-on service, because you also spoke to the importance of a real emphasis on project management, really making sure that once you identify the action steps, those action steps get carried out. How do you determine who works with Haldane? You must have a big staff, or at least a staff. So how would that be? Would it be one person? Would it be a group of people? Would it be people? To what extent would there be folks dedicated to the school? Just sort of general staffing questions.
Absolutely.
How would you personnel this?
So that's a great question. So for clarification, it's not 200 school districts, it's 200 schools.
Thank
So
you.
it's probably closer to about public school districts, about 50 school districts.
But it's still a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have, some of the other schools, we have a lot of private schools across, the area as well.
Thanks for
But it's a
clarifying.
great question as far as how we treat it. So one of the things that we really are very strict about is that when we assign someone to a specific school district, we want them to become really, really super familiar with the staff, the building, rather than taking an approach of a team effort where we're bringing in different instructors at different times. It just doesn't work. It's not to say that our team is not involved in the background or comes in for specific interventions, but once we get someone in the district, and Dr. Benanti probably can speak to it, is that we've had a consultant that's been working in the Arlington School District now for since 2013. It's the same consultant that's worked with those teams year in and year out. I'm always involved with every single account. So I typically work with at the district and the board levels. So that's who you'd be dealing with at that level. But it's critically important from the project management standpoint that we have consistency and uniformity in how we work. So I hope that answers that piece. The other piece is that remember that after the first year, those 125 planning steps, the majority of them, not all, should be done. And then now we're dealing with the cyclical things that are, okay, we know we have to train every year. We know we have to update our plans every year. We know we have to look at these every year. We have to look at our equipment, open up our Go kits to make sure all the contents are on there. So there's a bunch of maintenance, but certainly not to the level of the first year where we're spending an awfully lot of time here as far as going through the buildings, working with the teams, collaborating on all of your plans, where it's a much more detailed intervention. But the other piece too, as I mentioned earlier about we don't work with every single school district that picks up the phone or a private school if it's not a good fit. There have been a couple of times throughout the last decade or so where we just had surges. With post a Sandy Hook or even a Parkland, there are going to be times where we have to be open and honest. And I would, if perfect example, if I had been standing here in February, I'd be telling you that call me next year because we simply don't have the capacity to do it. There are firms out there that will simply say, oh, no problem, we can deal with it, only to fall flat on your face. This is a relationship business, and we know that. We have to underpromise and over-deliver to you. So if we say we're going to be here in 30 days, you'll probably see us in 2 weeks. Because I understand the dynamic of you're always better off surprising the client and saying, hey, we're doing a better job with this. And you have to be responsive. If we don't have the capacity to do it, then we're not doing you service. And the stakes are too high with safety and security to do that. So we're very good about staying ahead of the curve as far as bringing on the additional staff as we need them, and we grow very responsibly.
John, something I noticed last week, there was that, if you can speak to it, there was that matter that impacted many entities across the country with a threat being called in, or
Yes.
there was an email threat, and it actually impacted a local business and was quite disruptive, of course,
Absolutely.
right as buses are going home. But you follow up with the schools which you work with.
Absolutely.
If this happens to you, and I don't want to get into too much detail, but I think it's a demonstration, though, of the service that you provide when an incident like that happens and
Right.
may still be active. Any school could have experienced that in the days following. Can you just talk a little bit about how you approach that with the schools with which you work?
Sure, and this happens, I don't want to say frequently, but frequently enough that it's an issue, is that whenever there's something in mainstream society that is coming up, so that's a perfect example of it, where there are widespread bomb threats. We had an issue last year where there were robocall bomb threats that were going out. We always get ahead of the curve. And while I don't have everything in the can, we certainly have a lot in our arsenal that we're ready and prepared for many of these things, and we get ahead of it with our school districts. So subsequent to that coming to light, we distribute it to all of our clients to say, here's what's going on. This is the facts of what's going on here. Should you encounter this, here's a reminder on how we evaluate bomb threats, how we collaborate with our law enforcement partners to consider, and even to the point of, here is the community message that you should be prepared to send should your school district receive that particular threat. You don't want to be worrying about crafting a message subsequent, and then people are wondering what's going on, what's happening on there. So again, the bomb threats are designed to instill fear and to disrupt the educational process. That's what they're designed to do. And potentially you're much more vulnerable outside of a school building than you are in a school building. So you have to look at all of these factors and not have automatic policies that if this happens, we automatically do this. It's situational awareness. But we work with you on that to be prepared.
I thought that was a good example, just from a financial standpoint of, even in just knowing that was going on, having to try to pull all the administrators together, talk about this is going on, this is clearly out there, well, what if it happens here? That's a couple of hours at least, if not more, between 4 or 5 individuals here that are not focused on what's going on in the school yet. With what Altaris sends, it's literally a 15-minute stand-up meeting. Okay, here's the guidance from Altaris. Let's go through it. And so we're all on the same page. Should a school receive a call like this, and here's what our response is going to be. Not to mention, potentially, if you don't have an appropriate response, the hours you're spending at board meetings and afterwards trying to explain, why you did what you did. So I think it was a good example, just having happened to see that last week.
Mm-hmm. So you've spoken a few times about training, right, and the importance of training, different kinds of training, and I think one of the things we know is that especially when people are under stress, having had really good training so that responses are pretty automatic is really important. I'm not looking for a hugely long answer, or even a long answer, but these trainings are really important. Like, who develops these trainings for you all? How do you develop them? How do you update them over time?
So that's actually a very good point, because one of the things that we typically mention to districts during the evaluation process is that the consulting is not the world according to Altaris. Everything that we do is based upon best practices that are documented. They're based on agencies like FEMA, Department of Homeland Security, and most importantly, lessons learned. So one of the things that we glean from every event that occurs in the world is, how do we get better? How do we prevent this from happening again? So one of the things you'll see in our assessment report, if you choose to go forward, is that you'll actually see, here's the best practice, and why is it a best practice? This is why it's a best practice. So we detail what it is, what the references are on there, so that if you want to look a little bit further to see what it is on there, we have it based on there. The other piece, as far as our training goes, you have to be in compliance with what New York State says as well. So there are definitely best practices related to training, so protocols, evacuation, and lockdowns and lockouts, all the things that everyone is very, very familiar with. But specific to New York State, each school district has to comply with certain regulations and details on those steps. A big part of the project management process is to make sure that all the planning steps are in place to support those protocols. Because if we don't do the planning ahead of time, those protocols will not be successful in implementation. So that's critically important. But the training is probably the single best piece that we offer to you, and that you will get tremendous feedback from your personnel and your teams, because it's on everyone's mind. And they're starving for the fact of, hey, listen, we're thinking about this every time we walk in these buildings, and they should know that statistically you're much safer in a school building than you are in the private workplace, and that's known. But anytime something happens in a school, it's heart-wrenching because of the precious assets in these buildings. But it's on their minds. So they're starving for the fact that we want to be trained, we want to know what to do, we want to feel more comfortable about it, and that's something that we bring to the table. And we literally have refined this program tremendously over the last decade, because we take into account all the things that people want to know about and the best practices and the lessons learned. So it's a fantastic training program.
Thank you.
To follow up on that, and this might be more of a question for you, Phil,
Sure.
but can you talk now about what kind of training does our staff currently do, in terms of like how much time or when it's done, or if it's not
How would
done,
it fit
and
the
then
schedule?
where do you see this fitting in? Because obviously there will be what I'm assuming is an increase of training. So how does that get fit into a staff's
Sure.
day?
I think on one of the things that I was assessing coming in was I think one of them was the meetings of our building level emergency response teams. And there is a building level emergency response team. I don't think they're active enough to fully be prepared were there a critical incident. And that's no one's fault. I think we prioritize teaching and learning, and that's a great thing. But we also need to actively meet throughout the school year to make sure we're well versed in, is it still the simple six?
It is still the simple
The
six.
simple six, which are, six kind of standard responses that you could utilize at any point, and that our staff would be well versed in, given a variety of scenarios that you may or could encounter in a school. And John alluded to some of those before. And that takes a certain frequency of meetings. So typically, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but you're identifying a building emergency response team. That team meets, I don't know, John, what was your recommendation? I think for when we first started, we probably met once a month, but I think we backed off of that over time as we felt that the level of readiness was better.
It really depends on the district. It depends
Right.
on what's going on in the district. We don't want to have meetings just to have meetings, but it's important that you convene on a regular basis
Yeah.
to discuss concerns, go through protocols,
Right.
go through tabletop exercises, which is a big part of the training. It's not just
Right.
us standing up in front of a room. Initially we do a full day training with each of the building emergency
Yeah.
response teams to lay down the foundation. From there, we want to work upon building specific exercises that are realistic to your buildings, not boilerplate, hey, there's a bomb threat in your XYZ school. It's there's a issue in this middle school showing you these floor plans, these satellite views, how are we going to manage this, and work them through that so that if in fact a real event occurs, as you said, it's muscle memory. That's what you have to build upon. Police officers are a perfect example. They do not have the time to pull out a manual to say, someone's pointing a gun at me, what do I do? It's muscle memory. It's repeated training that you just instinctual. That's what you need in school settings, because under stress, you lose fine motor coordination, you panic, you make bad decisions, you get tunnel vision. These are real physical responses. So that's why we have to build in that muscle memory and keep it top of mind moving forward.
Right. And I think ultimately, John mentioned the full day training, but usually you're working from that to a monthly meeting of 30 to 40 minutes. And then the frequency of those monthly meetings may ebb and flow once the team is active and there's a level of general preparedness and feeling of a general preparedness among staff. And so, which for us was before school. It didn't impact the teacher being in a classroom. That was part of your role as a committee member, was to meet before school. In addition to that, then there's the district emergency response team, which is has a slightly broader lens. Haldane's a little different, so I still need to think about how that would function, but essentially our building principals coming together, incidents that are coming up in the elementary school or nuances that are coming up in our preparedness at the elementary school may help inform the high school and vice versa, so we want to make sure we're coming together periodically to talk about that, as well as just general campus assessments here. Previous role, we spent more time on processes and protocols because we wanted a similar protocol across 11 buildings. Here, I think we'd be able to get at that pretty quickly, but even still, we've struggled with that in some ways. So, and I think we've talked about that here. So, for us, I think it would be the value add would really be on campus-wide measures. And that's where the expertise of the group could really be helpful. And so, some thoughts. Did that answer your question? Or?
Not exactly.
I knew you would
that
be
was
honest
helpful.
with me.
That
Yeah.
was helpful information. But
Mhm.
the other part of it, I guess, is I'm just wondering, how does it fit in? Because you're talking about the emergency, the team, the committee team.
Yep.
And that's one entity, but then it's all the staff.
Yeah. So from
Right? So
from there.
how does all the staff,
Yep, so-
what do they currently do in terms of training, and,
Mhm.
and what do you anticipate it needing to
Right.
shift to?
I just having lived here for 5 or 6 months, I don't think we've necessarily prioritized any particular element of staff readiness or training in our release time. So superintendent's conference day, half day or 2-hour early release or late arrival,
Delay or-
late arrival time. In the past, I think it has really varied. Under this model, when you're engaging with Altaris, we would have to reserve time at future superintendent's conference days or delayed start days to make sure that we were fully training our staff on response protocols and procedures under the framework that Altaris works with. I don't think it's a lot of time that gets in the way of our other priorities. I think it's just a matter of because their training is really clear and it's to the point. And some of these, with respect to that, you want to take a lot of the variability kind of out of it, and their protocols are based on that. So there doesn't have to be a lot of thought put into, oh, this has happened, what do I do? So I think those trainings can be delivered fairly directly and within a relatively short amount of time, and the value add in terms of the staff feeling like they know what to do and feeling a general sense of preparedness, which is good for kids ultimately, is significant.
That's what I was just going to say. I would think this is something that the staff would really be interested in. I know you've had experience in other districts, but to me, I would think staff would be looking at this as the greatest opportunity that they've been given.
We frequently get asked by our liaisons in various districts to say that our staff is asking for additional training in this. Can you free someone up to do that? And even though that might not be part of the definitive deliverables, we simply just do it. Because that's part of the relationship that we have with you. All staff are required to have emergency response training in these protocols by September 15th annually of each year, or within 30 days of hire. So everybody September 15th. Subsequent to that, you hire someone, you have a substitute teacher and your teacher's aide, whatever, they have to go through training. And there's two mechanisms that we can do that. We can do that live, obviously, with superintendent's conference days. We do a lot of training in August for many school districts. And we also have the availability of an online training portal so that when you do onboard a new person, part of that onboarding process is you do sexual harassment, bloodborne pathogens, right to know, and emergency response protocols, because you don't want someone to be a weak link in the building that potentially is the one that sees the threat, doesn't know what to do, and we've seen that, Sandy Hook being one of the biggest prominent ones, where you had substitute teachers who were unaware of specific protocols or did not have the ability to do certain things, i.e. lock a door. So those are the kind of things we want to avoid. Everyone in this building, or in these buildings, plays a critical role, so we have to make sure they're all part of this process. Critically important.
Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about post-assessment prioritization of opportunities?
So there are, closer to the mic? Okay, no problem. So several of the items on there, when we give those to you, they're in what we recommend prioritization order. And then the discussion happens, and this can take several hours to go through them. In fact, I just came from one in Lower Westchester. The district team goes through those as a group and decides on, A, do we buy into that? And like I said before, typically you will. What's the timeline? So the timeline for us is it short term, which would be 1 to 3 months, midterm, which would be 3 to 12 months, and long term would be 12 months and beyond. So when you're talking about something like building a vestibule is not, if you said today I want a vestibule, you would not be able to get that for at least 12 months at this point because of the process. And I'm sure that most of you are aware that when you do something in a school building, it's not like if you're doing something in your house where you go down to the building department and say, here's my application, 3 weeks later you have a building permit. Schools have to go through a very exhaustive process of state ed where people have to look at it, and it can take 42 weeks to go through that process. So, and that's something that a lot of the community sometimes doesn't even realize, that, well, how come this hasn't happened? You have the money to do it. There's a whole process that schools have to go through, and they promised us post some of these events, we're going to streamline the process. Other than the fact of giving the districts the ability to say, you can pay an engineer lots of money to look at them for us, and then we'll streamline it, which now costs districts lots of extra money. So the third-party reviews, as they're called. And again, if you've gone through this process, I'm preaching to the choir. But so that's a big piece as well. But we go through that to identify how those fall into play. We identify who needs to review this. If it's a fast track, it means that the group right then and there says, we're going forward with it, because it doesn't really impact the culture of the school district. So if you're talking about we're going to change locks because you can only lock from the interior of the room and not the exterior, that's not something that's going to have an impact. It really requires you to go out to a broader group. Many larger districts, there's a difference between, let's say, your district team, which is going to be comprised of your principals, and the administrative council. So in Haldane, it's likely going to be one and the same. So that team can probably make most of the decisions. If it's something that impacts the entire school community, which could be teachers, staff, students, and even parents, well, that's something you're going to want to go out to a number of different groups to say, we want your input on this before we implement that. And that could mean something like, we now want a policy of all students to wear identification in the building and use them for access control. That's going to have broad-reaching impact. So some things you do want to get, the entire school community involved with that particular process. So once we have that, now that gives us okay, we've got our short, medium, and long-range plans. How do we now calendar these things out so that we have deadlines and landmarks for making real progress, as opposed to just saying, well, here's a bunch of stuff, 3 months later, well, did we do anything? Well, not really.
Right. Just to follow up a little bit, that's very helpful. How do you put things in priority order to begin with? What are the metrics or considerations you use to say, this is the most important thing you need to do, and then it gets slotted into community impact, non-community impact, short, medium, long investment, that sort of stuff? So
life safety is number one. Okay. So when we look at those things, we look at how quickly can we get this implemented, and what is the impact on the safety of the people in the building. So if something is a shorter timeline and absolutely unequivocally will impact as far as life safety, that's going to go first. Then there are other things, and again, we talk about cameras and things like that. Cameras might make people feel safer, but do they actually make you safer? Mm-hmm. So those are the kind of things that we look at as a group and decide that what are these things, if we're able to have the ability to lock our doors better or provide safe havens, those are the types of things that we're going to obviously put at the top of the list, particularly if they're low-hanging fruit and can be implemented right away. Certainly, you want to get the ball rolling on things that might be a long-range plan, because again, we may say, okay, listen, we're going to work on this. It's going to require money. It's going to require approvals, but we want to get that in motion as we work on the low-hanging fruit going forward.
Okay.
So, and again, it's difficult, and I'd love to say that every district does it exactly the same way.
Oh, sure, it doesn't.
It doesn't. It doesn't. But certainly, once you go through the process, you start to realize this kind of makes sense now, that certain things have to happen. And then you also have the other pieces that who goes first.
Yeah.
So when you have a school district, and the larger the district, the bigger the problem is, somebody's got to go first, somebody's got to go last.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about putting new locks in a school building, which building's first? So those things always come up, and it's always a challenge, but we've really gotten it down to a science as far as making the right decisions and trying to get as much done in the shortest period of time.
Cool. You talked a little bit about software implementation and tracking. Could you give a little bit more detail about that?
Sure. So everything that we do, once we get into the project management phase, is based on a project management platform that takes all the items that we talk about in assessments and emergency planning steps, puts them into that system, assigns accountabilities on who should be doing that. Communications on those particular pieces are all in that platform. All the district administration has access to that, as well as the principals, so they can see what's going on, what the status of it is. We set deadlines and timelines on there, and it really is, it's kind of like building a house.
Yeah.
When you build a house, you have to have certain timelines on there. You lay the foundation first, then you frame, then you put your roofing on, then you weather tight. That's kind of the same process that we go through. But again, we have to use software, because again, if we don't use a platform to manage all the tasks that are out there, things just simply don't get done, and they get lost in the shuffle.
Sure. Who's doing who's like managing the software, doing data entry, tracking, all that sorts of stuff?
So again, everyone has access on your end of
Yep.
it. We have a technology person that works in the firm that actually reviews those, but all of our consulting team works in that platform as well.
Yep.
So if I'm assigned to your school district as a consultant, I'm looking to see, okay, what are we working on next with Haldane? We're working on this, this, and this, and they're communicating with the people that need to be communicated with. That might be the facilities director, might be the IT person, might be the business official, might be a principal in the building, to get those particular things done.
Does it end up being the responsibility of a single person on the district to sort of shepherd it through?
I wouldn't say there's a single person that's responsible, because again, it's management by committee, and the district team gets very involved. This is probably going to be new for the district team, because it's going to be a much larger role. When we start working with the district, as much as we take a lot of the heavy lifting off your shoulders, there's a degree of collaboration and buy-in that's going to have to happen from the district. We're not in it to create additional work for you,
Right.
but there's just certain things that we need to say, listen, we need your approval to move forward and get that ball down the field.
Right. Right. What are the scenarios or issues that you feel are the most important to, not from a PR perspective, but from a health safety perspective, to immediately address in most of the districts you enter?
Well, there's a lot of things.
Yep.
It's tough to pinpoint,
Top three.
a select few. Certainly, access control is one big piece,
Uh-huh.
okay? But when we talk about access control, we're saying that we want to protect and harden the perimeter of our building. Unfortunately, many of the events that we've seen in schools, the person was lawfully in the building.
Right.
That, extended the violence to the rest of the building. We don't pigeonhole active shooter situations, and you have to get away from that. You have to be prepared for the worst of the worst, but statistically, as Dr. Benante said, is that you're much more likely to face a host of other hazards in your buildings that you
Right.
have to be prepared for. And unfortunately, if you don't do the planning, you can fall flat on your face. And I don't think the community would appreciate it when there's I don't want to say a ground ball event, but something that should not have gone the way it went, because you simply didn't prepare for it, you didn't train for it, and you didn't think through the process to say, how did you not identify that there was going to be a gap in this particular process? So training is a big piece as well. Some of the technology interventions, so again, when we look at the worst of the worst, we want to make sure that a building has the ability to effectively lock down, which means that how do we get the message out if we're standing here now? How do we get the message all the way across, and with a campus like this, to the other building as well? So that's a piece where we have to figure out, how do we do that effectively right now? The other piece is, does everyone in this building have the ability to effectively lock down in their space without being put in harm's way? So we look at things like door locks in buildings, glass, a host of other hazards that go with that. And then, of course, obviously things like parent reunification, because if there was an event here, at the building that would necessitate you to actually one-on-one reunify your children with the parents, you have to have a plan for that, have a very detailed plan. And that is a piece that districts fail at miserably all the time, because they have not gone through the process, they have not communicated well with their parent stakeholders on what the process looks like, what to do and what not to do. We know, and no disrespect to the parents in the room, but we know that you can tell parents whatever you want, and I have 3 myself in public schools, that we're going to do whatever we want when we hear there's an emergency at our school and our child's in danger. But unfortunately, what happens is that compromises your ability as a school district, as a police department, as a fire department, to manage the event. Because when parents come, and they're running towards the building, and they're leaving the cars in the road, and they're banging on windows, and we're trying to identify who the bad person is or what the issue is here, it compromises things. So those are probably some of the major items that we deal with right off the bat.
Okay. Sorry, 2 more. How do you measure the effectiveness of your recommendations?
Well, again, our recommendations are all based upon well-documented best practices. We want to make sure that not only do we recommend them, but they're implemented and in place. So there are certain things out there, and I'll be very candid with you, that there is a lack of good documented research. And I can share a host of documents that'll actually say, Johns Hopkins is one of them that did an exhaustive study on school technology several years ago. And on half of the items, they talked about the fact of more research needs to be done, and this is a lack of documented research. It just kept repeating itself over and over again. We talk often about school resource officer programs. If you've worked with a school resource officer, if they've lived in your schools for any period of time, you know as a district, they're invaluable. They prevent more things than they actually get involved with, because again, they're an educator first, a counselor second, and a law enforcement person last for that critical incident. But there's a lack of documented research on what it's very difficult to quantify what a police officer as an SRO prevents in a school building from happening, because it didn't happen. So again, you'd love to have the big, splash headlines that say, the FBI was able to, uncover this terrorist plot. It doesn't happen in school settings there. But even a conversation with someone that says, hey, Johnny's having a party tonight at his house and everybody from the high school is going on there. We know that turns into sometimes tragedy. As simple as a house party might happen, deaths, arrests, all those things. And sometimes that intervention is enough to prevent something from happening. So those are the types of things but most of the things that we have well-documented evidence on there. And sometimes it's just a matter of saying a lot of emergency management is common sense. Mm-hmm. And that comes in our training all the time too as well. As people say, well, what if I can't be on your shoulder 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? Sometimes you have to look at it and say, okay, my training is, here are my 6 protocols, apply one or a combination of them to any issue, I should be able to manage it. But I can't tell you that if it's raining outside, 22 degrees, I'm in the left side of the building,
right,
and to be able to do everything. So there's a degree of common sense that comes into play.
All right.
I just wanted to add, when we had our meeting, one of the committee members said, Mr. LaPlaca, when you pulled up here, did you identify any shortfalls? And I'm obviously not going to go through those 3 for obvious reasons, but I just thought to myself, holy cow, I would have never thought of those 3 things. And pretty simple fixes, in my opinion. It's not like they would be major fixes, but they're pretty common sense. Now that you said it, I would have never thought it.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why, when you work with someone that's not selling a product per se, there's no money to be made when I give you a low-hanging fruit recommendation that costs nothing at all. But when you think about it, you say, that's probably a better fix than going out and spending $100,000 on this widget sometimes. So, and when you live in school buildings as we do, across a wide range of platforms and communities, you begin to say, this becomes instinctual for us. I mean, we're very good at what we do because we see it every day, day in and day out. This is all we do. We don't deal with corporations. We don't deal with higher ed. We deal with K-12 and their unique environments, from those other entities I just mentioned.
Well, and this really, sort of to build on Laura's point, it really gets at, I think, what motivated Dr. Benante to have us consider Altaris was, our administrators, they have very full plates. They have their expertise is in their area of expertise. And their area of expertise isn't as, to any extent, the same as that of school safety specialists. Like there's a real place for expertise and specialists, to come in so that we're not relying on folks who have other kinds of expertise that are addressing issues. So I think this sounds really like extremely promising. Like very, to me, it checks all the boxes that I feel like this presentation as a whole in this community. You know, what has happened at some of the discussions that have happened at board meetings, at health and safety committee meetings. I mean, I really do feel like this really checks a lot of the boxes and is really addresses the concerns of, I think, the diverse opinions that exist in our community.
Yeah, I agree.
Any other questions?
That's okay. It's okay.
Okay.
Additional questions or comments from the audience this time? Well, thank you. I know it was a rather
Thanks, John.
lengthy, but it was very informative.
We talk about it, very passionate about it. So
Appreciate it.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
have a great evening.
Thanks, John. I'll be in touch, yeah.
Thank you.
That's always a good sign when somebody really wants to keep talking about something. That it really is.
Okay. So moving on, item E, these are the committee minutes for the Code of Conduct, Buildings and Grounds, and Safety meeting for our viewing.
Oh, Dr. Benante, I think we asked, or I think I might have asked for a copy on the next Building and Grounds Committee of the draft that you guys are working with for the.
You're right, I didn't follow. I remember you asking, I don't remember if it was here or
Yeah.
not,
It
but I'll
was
make
on
sure I.
the walkthrough.
On the
That's
walkthrough,
right,
I
it was on the
asked.
walkthrough.
Sorry, it wasn't
Yep.
like there wasn't a piece of
Thank you, which
paper.
I should have, or
That's
Nabil's
fine.
going to mention. And is that a draft for the full board? I'll just send it to the full board at this
Yeah, I
point.
think that would be helpful. Those of us who aren't on the Buildings and Grounds Committee, I think were mentioning that we felt a little out of the loop of the latest draft.
Got it.
So if we could see the latest draft, that'd be awesome.
Oh, and thank you very much for whomever is putting committee minutes on Google Drive.
They're all up
Much
there.
applause.
Yeah.
Or well, we're starting process.
Yeah. Yeah, so they should be, and we actually thought of bringing this up last meeting to point folks to it.
Yeah, that's great.
But you should be able to access them via the district website under committees, which will then take you by committee to the Google Drive.
Great.
It's hyperlinked to the Google Drive where the
No
minutes
searching
exist.
board docs.
No
You don't have to
searching board
search
docs.
board docs, but they're there too if people want them, so.
Searching board docs is
Yeah,
really laborious.
especially on your phone. It's not as
On your
bad
phone,
on.
it's nearly impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
I
It
can't
just
believe they don't
jumps
have an app.
everywhere. Andrew, get on creating that app for board
App
docs.
for board
Yeah.
docs, Andrew, there you go.
I'll talk to my
people.
resources.
Your people.
Sounds good. All right, moving on to information reports. We'll start with you, Andrew.
All right. So, one big thing that's been going on in the high school this week and last week is that this whole student council body has been taking on the task to try to make anonymous random act of kindness inspired cards for everyone in the high school, which admittedly, even with all four student council bodies plus the overall student body president, we weren't able to do in a lunch period because that's many, many cards, but we're hoping to finish that by this week. And on a similar note, the peer mentoring group is hoping to do a similar thing for the middle school as we plan our upcoming random act of kindness week is what we're, I think, going to call it. And essentially our goal with that is to try to show middle schoolers in such a pivotal time socially that their actions do have positive consequences, or not positive positive dominoes, if you will, and create a lot of other goodwill in the community. On another note, yesterday the Model UN Club hosted its first Haldane Model UN session where we discussed the issue of cyber terrorism with about a dozen students, and we're hoping in 2019 to have many more committees hosted at Haldane. And then finally, I've been asked by a number of students to bring up the topic of a microwave usable to students in the high school during lunch periods. And I've talked with Ms. Sniffen about that, and we are currently looking into trying to get that worked on because I can speak from personal experience. It would be really nice to have a microwave in the high school, and I know a lot of other students share this, so thank you.
Thank you for all those wonderful comments.
Just one?
I
You're
heard
all gonna
about
stand in
the
line, or-
microwave issue.
Luke was the one that
Actually.
first came to me, actually.
He didn't come to me. He is using you wisely, your services wisely. Let's
He
see.
knows how the procedure works.
Yes,
Jim.
yes,
I
okay.
know I left the room to open the door and just talk to a couple kids, but the microwave, I'm assuming, is to heat food and not some weird science experiment.
So, as we all know, there's no cafeteria in the high school.
Got it. Just want to make sure.
I
it
think,
wasn't-
I think the former, yeah.
Ah, okay, good.
Although, I guess that's a concern that we would have to evaluate, and I'm sure Ms. Sniffin's on that. Oh. Okay, Mr. Wallach. Thank you, Andrew, for your comments.
Good evening, everybody, and just want to wish everybody happy holidays coming up. Time goes very quickly. It's hard to believe we're close to the end of 2018. In my board report tonight, I want to emphasize something that Dr. Benanti actually emphasized a little earlier in his report, was our music and arts programs that took place last week. We had an art show for grades 3 through 5, as well as our music concerts for the 4th and 5th graders. Dr. Benanti was there that evening. A couple of our board members who have elementary students were there that evening. Ms. Angela Branco works very, very hard with our art students. Kids make some sometimes very unusual, but always very creative and wonderful works of art that really show how much they're learning about the art curriculum as they work with her. So this was a grade 3-5 art show. There will be a kindergarten through 2nd grade art show in the spring when those students do their sing-along with Mr. McGroarty. As far as the music performances, and again, thanking Ms. Ferboda and Ms. Stein, but also want to thank Mr. McGroarty because the 5th grade band students were 4th grade band students last year, and he also, had a great deal to do with where they are right now. Our performances are much shorter, 3 to 4 pieces per ensemble, but that's appropriate for the age group of our students. The students had a great time performing. I believe the parents and other guests in the audience had a great time listening to the musical presentation. Some of them were seasonal, some of them were fun. We had a great time. We'll have another good concert from those groups in the spring, and we'll also be adding the 4th grade band for their first performance in the spring. So I just want to emphasize that. I'm so glad that our community values the arts so much and puts so much effort into our arts programs, both at the elementary school as well as the other schools as well. And it was a great evening last week, so thank you.
Great, thanks. And I hear your students are doing some great community work by collecting pajamas for.
We had a
That's awesome.
pajama drive. It was put together by the elementary school, but I believe it took place in all 3 buildings. It was 2 weeks long. It ended this past Friday. I didn't get a count on how many pairs of pajamas, but there were large boxes that kept getting filled up and then magically emptied, so there was room for more on the next day. So, always good to help people in need, and sometimes we forget that there are people in need very close to where we are. Most of us are lucky and have what we need, but not every family does. So we always try to help people out. We're also just district-wide collecting for holiday gifts for families that may not have, as much as they really would like to celebrate, and that's, some of our adults helping out with that as well. So, again, that's our whole school community coming together just to help others, which is really, really important and really nice to see, too.
Great, thank you. Dr. Silky.
Good evening, everyone, and happy holidays. I want to echo the appreciation of the music department. Last time we met, I highlighted the 8th grade and the 8th grade project on immigration, and I just want to highlight the music department and say that they're really doing an enormous amount of work to grow as a young department and to expand the music program. For example, this year they held a poinsettia sale to benefit a trip to Music in the Parks. So if you're not familiar, Music in the Parks is a great program where the students go and they perform, they're adjudicated with other schools, area schools, and then they spend the afternoon in the park having fun. So I'm looking forward to seeing the music program bring that to fruition because I think it'll be a great experience for our kids. Those poinsettias not only cheered many families in Cold Spring, but they also decked out the stage for our music concert, which was very well received. And I had a nice sneak peek of it at the depot on the 6th because Mr. Paganos, the proprietor there, invited Ms. Stein and Ms. Verboda and asked that they bring some of the students to Carol, and that was really a magical night. It was perfect. So a big thank you to the music department and to everyone who made that possible. I'm looking forward to see what's next out of that department. In hot off the presses today, the Counting by Sevens is the pick for the community read. So save the date for February 21st for our 2019 community read. And I just also wanted to take a moment to say a big thank you to Carol Story and all of her years at Haldane. Speaking of random acts of kindness, the students are running a Spirit Week this week, and today was Random Acts of Kindness Day. And many students opted to make Post-its of notes for Miss Story and plaster her office with Post-its while she was at her class. So she came back to this office filled with kind words from her students. And prior to that, both middle school and high school students had made notes that were taken and designed into a scrapbook for Miss Story. Hopefully she's not watching this because it's supposed to be a surprise.
It'll happen.
But so Friday is Miss Story's last day with us as our school's guidance counselor. So thank you. Happy
Thank you.
holidays.
Just to echo on that, actually, Miss Story was my guidance counselor as well. She's been here many, many years, and I want to wish her well in retirement. Well deserved. Mrs. Sniffen.
Try to keep my comments brief. Andrew did such a great job. I just want to direct parents to an email that was sent on December 13th about the scheduling process for next year. We have started that. As you have started budget, we start scheduling already. So December 13th, I did send an email to parents. That would be for students in 8th grade through 11th grade. We are just about finished with our class presentations to all students, giving them their course selections and what we'll be offering for next year. Students in grades 8 and 11 will have individual meetings with our guidance counselor to talk about building their schedule for next year. Students in grade 9 and 10, the students will make their course requests. The teachers will go through course requests as well. Parents will then get, here is a copy of the courses your child has selected, and parents can sign off on that or call to schedule a meeting because there's some questions in regards to their selections. This year, something new that we are doing on January 9th, we will have an 8th grade parent orientation to the process. We're inviting all Garrison parents in addition to all Haldane parents together. Again, that's January 9th at 6 p.m. So hopefully we'll see all the parents there.
Great. I just had one quick question, sorry, which I think is an important part as we continue to talk about social emotional trainings. And I see you have some DBT going on
Yes.
in the high school. Could you just
Yes.
talk briefly about that? Sorry.
So that's actually K-12. The DBT work is K-12. We've established our work with DBT. Our teachers went to the 4-day training on implementing skills groups and dialectical therapy for students. With that, we have DBT teams that meet weekly. So they review kind of the status, their confidential meetings, they review the status of students that they're working with, the skills that they're working on, and measuring the growth that the students are meeting in a team atmosphere. Administrators only enter those meetings once a month because they're really meant for the clinical team, people who have degrees as clinicians, to evaluate the growth that the students are making. So those meetings are happening weekly. Actually, today was one of the meetings. It's Tuesday. And then I've been going in once a month just as administrator to make sure that it's not another one of those initiatives that you start that it loses steam. So that's
I thought it was
DBT.
fascinating. So sorry. The Learning Differences Committee hosted actually a speaker
Yeah.
last year, and I thought it was a fascinating concept. So I'm excited that we're actually adopting that.
And just
in
for
our
anybody
district.
who's watching or who may not know, DBT is a specific framework or approach to help students who may have issues self-regulating or handling otherwise stressful situations. And that was a joint effort with Garrison, no?
Correct.
Right. So we
Yeah.
actually started the training with Garrison, and it's been a nice collaborative effort.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, Mr. Solomon was not able
He's
to
not.
be here this evening.
Mr. Solomon was excused because Mr. Solomon's been encouraged to attend every appointment with his wife related to the birth of his expectant 2 twins come February. So that's where he is this evening.
God, they're having twins.
And they're having twins, yep. So if you thought Mr. Salem was a little stressed out now, wait till February. Yeah, we're all like waiting in anticipation to see Chris with 2 babies.
I think he's the least stressed out person I've ever encountered.
You know, don't let him fool you. He's got it in him. But you're right.
Just wait.
He's pretty easygoing. That being said, I know in his report, it's kind of a transition period anyway for athletics, and we're just getting started off with the winter sports season, and basketball and other sports are off to a good start. So.
Great, thank you. Mr. Potros.
Good evening, everyone, and happy holidays. Just real briefly, wanted to let you know that we're continuing to work with staff to get our HVAC system to work better and be more responsive. Bless you. As you know, we have a bunch of dissimilar systems of varying age that don't lend themselves to automation in our building management system. So I'm working with the existing staff that we've got, the skill set that we've got, to be able to manipulate it. The building management system service provider is TBS Controls. We need to work with them a little bit better to manipulate and control the components that we have, but we also have to be able to tweak and manipulate and fix the various components as they break and need attention. And a lot of it is manual controls. So with having said that, the staff that we've got are very competent. We need to just do a little bit of realignment so that we can build a little bit more capacity in-house. We could spend a lot of money getting contractors in here to fix our problems and address our climate control problems, but we don't have the resources really to address all of that. We need to build that capacity in-house. So we're being, conscious of, saving money and using outside vendors only where needed, using our existing service providers, and realigning our staff resources so that we can, get the building to heat and cool as we want it, which is not easy given that we have dissimilar systems of varying age. And moving forward, we posted some new positions, and we've got some recommendations included tonight for the positions of account clerk typist and head cleaners. And we've engaged and embarked on some recruitment efforts for bus drivers and other staff that have yielded some good candidates. I'm happy to report, because we are really desperately short of bus drivers. In addition, we've got a bus driver retiring. So hopefully we'll have better news, and going forward we do have better news, and that we continue on that trajectory. Thank you. Happy
Great.
holidays.
By the way, the temperature in that gymnasium is great. Much better.
Some
So
of that is very easily attained just by us being more attentive and using the resources we have and vendors we've already procured, rather than just hiring folks and spending a lot of money.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to piggyback on, while I have the opportunity, to let the public know that we met for a building walkthrough. The board had the opportunity to do a walkthrough 2 weeks ago.
Yep, I think
I
approximately
believe.
2 weeks ago.
So we saw some of the items that Jen talked about, having to want to see the updated Buildings and Grounds Committee project list that you're all putting together. So we saw those firsthand, basically. But we look forward to that list as well. Thank you
It's
for taking
forthcoming.
that.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, any communication from the public at this time? No?
I would just give a shout out to the Arts Alliance, because it seemed like every night that I came to either Romeo and Juliet or middle school or elementary, they were all there. Corey was selling carnations that she'd been dyeing in her house. I mean, it's phenomenal. It's just incredible support. So thank you to all of them who do that.
Yes, thank you. Much appreciated. Okay, moving on to consent agenda minutes. May I have a
Motion.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Consent agenda financial. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Questions or comments?
Just a note that there is an approval of a grant from the Haldane School Foundation that was here as a late ad. We came to realize at the last minute that this is actually a grant that will be matched if approved before the end of the school year. So we did not want to lose the opportunity for essentially additional funding for our kids, or that goes directly towards programming for our kids. And that's why you see this grant tonight. The remainder of the grants from the School Foundation will be on our next agenda.
Is the Blueprint a newspaper or a publication that we do in-house?
The Blueprint is the student newspaper that ends up
Okay.
concurrently printed in the Highlands Current, correct?
Got it. Okay.
All right.
Nailed it.
Excellent.
Win. Small win for the night.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Consent agenda personnel. May I have a motion?
Motion.
Second.
Sorry.
Like, can I also second?
Can I do that? as well?
Okay, any questions or comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
If I may comment after, I didn't want to jinx it, but we have a visitor here, well, no longer a visitor, a new member of the family. I want to introduce you to Miss Lisa Kahan. Lisa is, as we mentioned, Miss Story is retiring. Lisa is going to be our new guidance counselor at the middle school. Lisa brings a wealth of experience. Yeah, nice school. 10 years, if I remember correctly, down in Tuckahoe. And then various short-term assignments. And so we welcome you to the Haldane community, Lisa. We're really looking forward to working with you.
Welcome and congratulations. Okay, moving on to unfinished business. There are no items here. However, there are two that are coming to mind that I'd like to just, the meetings that we normally have regarding tenure, as well as a midterm check-in with Dr. Benante about his progress. We should start to think about some dates and times that would work for
Yeah.
all of us.
I'm trying to be mindful because we have the board retreat as well. That's going to be in early February, although that's outside of the regular board meeting process. But the next few meetings, we probably should line up the tenure review or probationary review, as
Right.
I understand it, and then a mid-year check-in on your on my progress as your superintendent. So we should, I'll try to space those out.
Do you want to talk times now, or do you just want to put it in our heads for consideration?
I think we'll put it in
Okay.
our heads because Margaret's not here. And
Yeah.
maybe what we can do is put some dates together and then share with the group and decide. It'll be too long, though, to do it all in one night, having a new, I think. But that's,
But typically, I mean, it's not going to be rocket science to schedule these meetings, because typically it's an
It's right
exec
before. Right.
session right before a meeting.
Right.
And if our retreat is early February, if I'm
Mhm. It's the
remembering
5th, if
correctly.
I remember correctly.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically the two meetings in January.
Right.
If we wanted to do them before then, it would be one, and the other would be the other, or we could have one happen.
Probably what Laura and I would have come up with.
So-
You're right, it's not rocket science.
Well, I mean,
there was
usually
an
do like
issue.
a 5:30
There's
to
a
7 or a 5 to 7, and we get some nice dinner from the
There was-
cafeteria, and
Right, but there
then we
was
do it on a
some-
workshop because the administrators need to be there to chat about the teachers.
And then there was a workshop that we were thinking of maybe joining with Garrison. So there's a couple of things that we
Right.
need to,
Going to line up.
yeah, hash through. And your
Yeah.
travel
Got it.
schedule.
Nothing on the calendar so
Okay,
far.
good.
Can you give me 30 seconds on how the tenure process works?
Just upon my review,
Yeah.
it's more of a full any probationary teacher. It's an opportunity for the board to check in with principals about the progress that those individuals are making.
Which means anybody up to
So year 1 through
Through
year
3. So-
potentially 4.
year 4. Okay. So
Who will be coming up for a tenure recommendation.
Got it.
That you'd be expected to act upon probably
So it's
March.
review of anyone who is untenured.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
Okay.
basically, John, what happens is we meet in exec session
Yep.
with superintendent and all the administrators, and we just go down the list
Okay.
of who's on probation. They
Comment. For
give
anyone who's
adding-
not up for tenure, it's merely a time to sort of take a pulse check.
Right.
But
Correct.
for anyone who
A check.
is, it is a vote. It is a
No.
Not
recommendation.
necessarily.
No. What is it?
I would frame it more as so you're eventually going to come to act upon a tenure recommendation, right? So it's an opportunity for the administrator to share with you the contributions that this in the qualifications of this particular individual. So when you're making that vote, come 1 month later, you can do so with confidence.
Right. And at that time, they will be saying, I am or am not going to be recommending this.
Correct.
Okay, fine.
Correct.
Great.
And if there's any questions as community members that you may have for them, they would be available to answer them. So we're not discussing a personnel item in public session.
Yeah.
It's happening in
Yep.
exec session.
And I don't know if this is something that all boards do. I think it's something that this board
I
asked
don't know
to
how
do
we-
at one
or
point.
when we started
It's something
this.
that it's a little bit, I don't know. It's interesting. It's a little bit outside of the board's purview, I think, in the sense that these decisions about making recommendations for tenure really do happen by the administrators, those with the expertise to actually make those decisions. But there was a point before I joined the board where the board decided that to feel like they were voting with some level of
Knowledge.
improved knowledge or expertise to have these preliminary conversations. And so
Right.
they really are a chance,
Right.
I think, to check in.
Yeah,
So,
my experiences vary depending on what the board or boards have wanted. I certainly understand and respect that you want to make an informed decision. You take the voting process seriously. I think in previous role, what we were able to work towards is developing an understanding between the board and the administration at the superintendent's facilitation of what the review process entails. And it was also upon the recognition administratively that we needed to change the review process, that it wasn't thorough enough.
And we just approved that.
Right. And that once we felt we got the review process to a level that was appropriate, so of truly reviewing candidates, making sure the board was well informed of how probationary teachers were being reviewed over successive years, I think there became a level of trust where there wasn't a feeling of the need to sit down and have, the big meeting, an executive session to review all of that. But I think that's something we may have to work towards. So I want to be respectful of
But
the
there's
way it's been
also-
done here and we
Right.
go through it.
There have been instances, unfortunately, where things have been brought to our attention and where we then say, okay, well, show us additional documentation or information or, so when you do go, well, the way I feel is that is when we are voting, we are more informed and we can make the right decision.
And I want to be transparent. I think this is an area where we have more work to do administratively in terms of the review.
Procedural.
Yep, definitely. And it is what it is. I just think that there's certain minimum requirements of the law in terms of a review, but I don't think we should be defining our standard by the minimum expectation. So I think there's some more that we need to do in terms of evaluating and over the next few years. And we'll develop those. So I'll be sharing that as we go along.
Good.
And when I say we, I mean the administrative end, and it's not the governance end. That's not a criticism of the board in any way.
Great,
Okay.
Thank you.
Moving on to new business. Ms. Palmolaro.
Item 1 is the CSE CPSE recommendations. The recommended action is, be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education hereby approves the recommendations of the committees on special education and preschool special education as presented.
May I have a motion?
Motion.
second.
Questions or comments?
Do these just happen to, I had the question before about how much do we know, so I've done that, I understand that I'm not gonna do anything, which is great. Do they happen sequentially over the course of the year just because they happen sequentially? Or why wouldn't we see all of them at once?
At any point throughout the course of the school year, a student's program could be reviewed and modifications could be made to it.
Yeah.
So the ones you're typically seeing now are so putting CPSE aside,
Right.
because it could be a parent of a 3-year-old who feels that the child requires speech services and is just coming to examine that and look into it with their pediatrician or other providers, and now it's arrived here for your action. The ones that are internal, just students who we have in our K-12 system, it could be that the Committee of Special Education met last year, developed with the parent the IEP for this year. We're now 12 weeks into the school year, and there's a feeling that a particular element of that IEP is working. And is perhaps not necessary any longer, or there's a feeling of that there's a need for additional program support, and thus it's been added.
Or it could be a new student
Or it could be a new
entering the
student.
Could be a new
district.
student, thank you.
Or
Yep, that's a good
parent
example.
Or
requesting a
parent
review.
request.
Could be
Yeah.
a
Okay.
new student who, those are all good examples. So, yeah, it is an
It's
area. where-
rolling.
I think it's
admission
very
into
rare
CSE,
that
CPSE.
we go through a meeting where we won't see.
Oh, yeah.
something.
That's
It's just, sorry, I forget
But
where we're
it-
at.
I
I got
guess-
a.
You just need an all in favor.
All in,
I guess
sorry.
I guess the implication is that even mid-year, you're going to need to make potentially staffing changes to
Correct.
accommodate student needs rolling through the entire school year.
It's not
these aren't
always
staffing-
staffing. Sorry.
Well,
You
'cause
might
these,
not.
these aren't staffing we're not recommending staffing changes with this. We're recommending, it's accepting the recommendations of the CPSE and the CSE
Correct.
committee.
But that's not
for-
always true, because
But
when
it
there
may-
is a
Could have a
monetary
staffing
implication.
Oh, okay.
It could.
There could be programmatic changes based on the acceptance of, and that will happen
But
not at
we're-
the beginning of the year and certainly not at budget time, but that will have an ongoing impact.
But
Okay.
usually Ann
That's fair.
will identify if it
Yes.
has a monetary
Yep.
impact.
This one, it's the monetary impact is a potential savings of $20,000. I hate to frame it as a savings, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
$20,000 less cost than had been anticipated.
This is why Anne was so excited about the possibility that we might be able to have a special education savings account finally.
Yes.
Because this is a
good
constant
example.
problem
Absolutely.
that
This is useful for me to
you
understand
try to
something.
understand and anticipate, but special education needs and costs change throughout a year.
It's
Yep.
very fluid.
Yep. That's a good one.
And
Okay.
we all have to just stay fluid with it and hope we have the money to support it.
Right.
But it's a burden to districts if you don't have the money to support it, as you go. So,
Yep.
yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry.
No, no worries. Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
The next item is an approval of a resolution, release and settlement agreement. The recommended action states, be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education hereby approves the following resolution. Resolved that the Board of Education approves the terms of the release and settlement agreement involving student number 41895, a copy of which shall be incorporated by reference in the minutes of this meeting, and be it resolved that the superintendent of schools be and hereby is authorized to execute such release and settlement agreement on behalf of the district.
May I have a motion?
Motion?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Any communication from the public?
Happy holidays.
No? Yes. Happy holidays. Enjoy the break. And may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Thank you.